It happened quietly. No emergency press conference. No flashing red banners. No officials rushing to podiums to calm the public. But if you understand institutions, if you understand how power behaves when it feels cornered, you know this moment matters. Because a major institution just did something it has deliberately avoided for more than a decade. Not because it could not do it. Not because it lacked authority. But because once you cross this line, there is no pretending anymore. For years, the strategy was delay. For years, the language was careful. Temporary measures, transitory risks, extraordinary but short-term actions. And most people believed it, or at least wanted to. But behind closed doors, the math never stopped running. Balance sheets never stopped expanding. Liabilities never stopped compounding. And pressure never stopped building. Institutions do not act out of morality. They act out of necessity. And necessity has a way of forcing honesty when narratives fail. For more than 10 years, this institution avoided one specific move because it knew exactly what it would signal to the world. It would admit that the old tools were no longer working. It would confirm that the system was no longer self-correcting. It would expose the gap between appearance and reality. So instead, they improvised. They adjusted language. They adjusted timelines. They adjusted expectations. But they avoided this one action. Until now. And the reason they finally crossed that line is not optimism. It is pressure. Because systems only change when maintaining the illusion becomes more dangerous than revealing the truth. For over a decade, the global financial system has been held together by confidence. Not productivity. Not discipline. Confidence. Confidence that debts could always be rolled. Confidence that growth would return. Confidence that interventions were temporary. But confidence is not infinite. It is borrowed. And when it starts to decay, institutions feel it first. They see it in bond auctions that do not clear cleanly. They see it in capital flight disguised as diversification. They see it in volatility spikes that arrive without headlines. And eventually, they see it in one terrifying metric. Control. Because once markets stop responding to guidance, once forward statements lose power, once credibility erodes, the institution faces a choice. Admit weakness or escalate force. This move was escalation. Not dramatic enough to cause panic headlines. Not subtle enough to be ignored. It was calibrated, deliberate, and irreversible. The institution framed it as technical, administrative, routine, but insiders know better. This was not maintenance. This was not fine-tuning. This was a signal that the old playbook has run out of pages. For more than 10 years, this institution relied on indirect influence, encouragement, incentives, backstops that were never supposed to be used. The goal was always the same: stabilize without being seen, control without admitting control. But something changed. The system stopped behaving. Markets no longer reacted the way the models predicted. Participants stopped trusting reassurances. And volatility began leaking into places that were once considered safe. When institutions lose predictability, they lose authority. And authority is everything. So they did what they had promised they would not do. They crossed the line they swore was a last resort. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. And the most important part is not what they did. It is when they did it. They waited until the moment where doing nothing became more dangerous than doing too much. That timing tells you everything. This was not proactive. It was reactive. And reactive actions always reveal more than intended, because once you deploy a tool you avoided for a decade, you tell the world one simple truth. The system is no longer stable enough to wait. For years, the public was told that the system was resilient, that safeguards were in place, that lessons had been learned from past crises. And on paper, it looked convincing. Capital requirements were higher, stress tests were conducted, liquidity buffers were built. But paper resilience is not the same as real resilience. Real resilience shows up under pressure. And pressure has been building quietly. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in 1,000 small distortions. Asset prices drifting away from fundamentals. Debt servicing consuming more cash flow than productivity can replace. Growth supported more by policy than by innovation. These are not signs of strength. They are signs of dependency. And dependency creates fragility. Because when a system depends on intervention to function, intervention becomes the baseline, not the emergency. That is where this institution found itself. Trapped. Unable to step back without triggering instability. Unable to step forward without exposing control. So it delayed, every year the same promise. Normalization soon. exit strategies later, temporary measures extended quietly. But reality does not care about press releases. At some point, markets test credibility. They test it by ignoring guidance, by pricing risk higher despite reassurances, by demanding compensation for uncertainty. And that is when institutions feel fear. Not fear of collapse tomorrow. Fear of losing narrative control. Because once participants believe the institution is reacting instead of leading, trust erodes fast. This move was designed to reassert authority, to remind markets who sets the rules. But here is the paradox. The more forcefully an institution intervenes, the more it reveals that natural stability is gone. This action did not restore confidence. It exposed fragility, because if the system were healthy, this tool would still be unnecessary. Think about what avoiding this move for a decade actually means. It means they knew the cost. They knew it would distort behavior. They knew it would change incentives. They knew it would create second and third order consequences. So they avoided it, until the consequences of not acting became worse. That is not strength. That is triage, and triage tells you the patient is critical. The institution insists this is precautionary, that it is simply ensuring smooth functioning. But smooth functioning does not require decade-avoided tools. Smooth systems self-correct. Fragile systems require force. This move shifts risk. It does not remove it. It moves pressure from one place to another, from balance sheets to behavior, from transparency to opacity, from confidence to compliance. And compliance is not trust. Compliance works until it does not. The deeper issue is that this action changes expectations permanently. Once you show willingness to cross this line, markets adjust behavior, risk-taking adapts, leverage migrates, unintended consequences emerge, and the institution knows this. Which is why the move was delayed for so long. But delay only increases eventual impact. Now, the narrative will be managed carefully. Officials will emphasize control. They will highlight safeguards. They will reassure stability. But watch behavior, not words. Watch how capital moves. Watch how risk is priced. Watch how participants hedge. Those reactions reveal true confidence. Because institutions speak in statements. Markets speak in actions. And markets just received a message they cannot unsee. The institution has admitted, through action, that the system requires direct intervention to function. That admission cannot be undone. It will shape decisions for years. This is not a pivot, it is a confession. And confessions change psychology. Once people realize stability is enforced rather than organic, they behave differently. They protect themselves first. They trust later. They assume intervention will increase, not decrease. That mindset accelerates the very instability institutions fear, which is why this moment matters. Not because of immediate impact, but because of what it reveals. The system has crossed from confidence-driven to control-driven. And history shows what comes next. When institutions cross this threshold, outcomes narrow. There are only three paths forward. 1. Sustained intervention becomes permanent policy. 2. Pressure builds until something breaks. 3. The system restructures under stress. None of these are comfortable, and none are consistent with the narrative of normality. This is why the move was avoided for so long. It marks the end of pretending. From here, every future action will be interpreted through this lens. Every assurance will be questioned. Every policy shift will be scrutinized. Every calm period will feel temporary, because once you show the tools behind the curtain, belief changes. This does not mean collapse is imminent. It means the margin for error is gone. It means the system is now sensitive to shocks it once absorbed easily. And it means institutions must work harder to maintain stability with diminishing returns. The real danger is not the action itself. It is the precedent. Because now that this line has been crossed, crossing it again becomes easier. What was once unthinkable becomes available. What was once extreme becomes optional. That is how escalation becomes normalized. And normalization of force always ends the same way. With trust replaced by enforcement, with flexibility replaced by rigidity, with resilience replaced by control. The institution did not choose this path lightly, but it chose it nonetheless, because the alternative was losing control altogether. So understand this moment for what it is. Not a technical adjustment, not routine management, not proactive stability. This was an admission under pressure. An institution acknowledging that the system no longer behaves without supervision. And once supervision becomes mandatory, freedom contracts. Markets will adapt. Participants will hedge. Capital will seek safety. But safety now means independence from policy, not alignment with it. That is the irony. The more aggressively institutions act, the more they encourage decentralization, diversification, and self-protection. This move may buy time. It will not restore trust. Trust is built slowly and destroyed instantly. And today, a decade of avoidance ended, not with a speech, not with an apology, but with action. And actions, unlike words, cannot be taken back. So watch carefully. Because the most important developments will not be announced. They will be revealed in behavior. And once you know what to look for, you will never see these moments the same way again.